It is your first move-in week here at the University of Colorado. What has it been like? What have you seen? And how excited are you finally seeing a new generation of students come into a school that you are now shepherding?
It's fantastic. So, the students are why we're here, right? And so it's one of those weird professions where you look forward to traffic and parking issues because that means they've come back, right? And in past positions, we would joke, yeah, imagine if they didn't come back. And then we went through a couple of years where they didn't come back, right? And so we've lived that, and I'd rather have the traffic than them not come. It's always wonderful to get out there and meet the students face to face and talk to the parents, and there's just uniform enthusiasm and excitement. They have their lives planned out, and we're here to either help them actuate that plan or help them rip that plan up and come up with a brand new one that's even better.
I was going to say, speaking as someone who ripped their plan up and came up with something better, I can very much understand that feeling and that input.
That's what we want to do. I want them to explore. So this is the window, and I'll share this with them at Convocation on Friday. This is the window in their lives when they actually have that time and opportunity to try all sorts of things that you may want to try now, but you got to go to work, you got everything else in life. And I tell them, find something, a club or an activity on campus that you're pretty sure you're not going to like, and go do it and try it. And you may learn something new about yourself, or you may get confirmation, yeah, that really was as bad as I thought. But you're going to meet other students that you never would have met otherwise, and that's the real value. That's the key piece. No matter whether you like or don't like the activity, you're going to meet new people, and one of those people may become your best friend. And 50 years from now, you're talking about how you hated ballroom dancing and they're fantastic at it, but you got a great friend out.
Yeah. When you first arrived here, it is sort of a hallmark of all leaders when they take over a big organization to do the listening tour. And I know that that's somewhat cliche, but did you go on one, and what did you come away with in your first couple of months on the job here? It is the summer, the students are gone, you have the opportunity to really dive into the intricacies of what this university is. What did you find?
So I'm still on that tour, right? So this is day 52, I believe it is. And to your point, it was during the summer, so there's only so many people here to listen to during that window. So it gave me a chance to dive into more of the leadership team and how the university or the campus operates, how we relate to the system and operations. What are we doing to get ready for the fall? How do we start talking about goal setting for the campus? And then now I've got meetings set up with each individual dean, with each individual college. I'm going to start, and some of the institutes, and I've started meeting with some of the student groups, but others are like, we're not there, right? So I've met with some of the tri-leaders and some of the other student groups, but my schedule is still full of this listening tour, certainly for at least the next couple months.
What is the difference from a process standpoint? The theory of looking at a school on paper versus the practice of seeing it exist, and as a leader and as a chancellor, how do you move from one to the other of saying, okay, well, this college within the campus generates XYZ of enrollment, finances, et cetera, but then you have to actually look at them and see what some of the things maybe beyond a spreadsheet show. How do you rationalize those two things, and what is the process of doing that?
So, great question. And so one of the things there are a couple of things I talk about and remind myself of regularly. One is part of the beginning phase is looking at how does the university and campus present itself in a position description and in data, and then how does that compare to the culture, right, and the sort of unstated priorities and values of an organization. Right, and see how do those fit together, and then part of it is also thinking, I've been in a number of universities, and there's some core elements of large state universities that are similar or the same, but also coming in with the mindset of what worked elsewhere may not work here, and what didn't work elsewhere might work here. That you have to overlay, the mission, the vision, and the values with the culture and the people. From that operational sense. And so trying to bring all those pieces together is, I think, the first step. And then there's we're a complex system, like if you just think from like a systems mindset, which is part of my background. So there's conversation of, well, okay, so this unit has this enrollment. So why does it have that enrollment? Is it because was it student interest driven? Was it capacity driven in terms of, well, that's how much space we have for that type of lab and how many faculty we have, so we had to cap it, right? So how do we think about balancing out student interest, enrollment management, internal resources, right, and ability to meet demand, plus, with at least some influence of, okay, will these students be able to succeed afterwards, right? So it's complicated thinking through all those different elements, but it starts with talking to the people who are doing the work on the ground and talking to the students and finding out, okay, so why did you choose that major, right? What is it you hope to do afterwards? Right, so as part of that student exploration, a student may come in saying, I want to do this major because I want to do this career, and sometimes that's a perfectly consistent, two statements that are perfectly consistent. Other times it's like, well, if you want that career, why aren't you doing this major instead? And it's just a question of students really learning and exploring what each academic discipline can offer them.
It sounds like it's a lot of figuring out intricacies that are specific to the university and the system, yeah?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So on that note, you had told 5280 when you first got here the difference between this and a Penn State, for instance, right? Where that provost position is very different than a chancellor position because of the intricacies that existed within Penn State. For you, I know it is only day 52, but is there any uniqueness to CU and CU's system in particular that has stuck out to you as, okay, this is something that is unique to this university that I have not maybe seen before? Have you had that yet?
So I think one of the things I've discovered and pleasantly discovered is in the position description, there was truly a strong recurring theme of wanting to be leaders in sustainability. A sustainable campus, sustainability expertise in our research portfolio, in our impact statement, and that just sort of shines through in every conversation. Like, people really do want Boulder to be sort of the local, state, national, global, across the board leader in driving sustainability, not just from the sort of traditional academic perspective, but really from an implementation perspective. So when we talk about, we have some degrees focused on sustainability topics, should we be offering more, right? There's enthusiasm. Well, look at all the resources we have to put this together, right? When we talk about how do we advance decarbonizing the campus? Yeah, there's excitement. If anything, there's like, why aren't we doing this faster? And it's a great question. Then there's good reasons. And then why do we have all this fantastic research and so many great faculty doing all these different things, yet we're not known for it, across the board in the way we should be, right? So everybody wants that, the reality and the recognition for that space, and I think that's a unifying theme that you don't often see, like big unifying themes at campuses. And that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I say this as a former student, right? There are consistently evolving reputations, of CU Boulder, and I know that when I was a student here, there was a discussion about how do we move away from one specific way that people looked at us into maybe a different one, maybe one that garners a little more respect within academia, for instance. Do you feel that the salesmanship of a university is similarly important, where you want, I guess to rephrase that, do you prioritize the opinions of certain communities over others in terms of how you want this university to be viewed? So
I certainly value making sure that people's opinions of CU Boulder reflect CU Boulder's reality. Right? I think to me that's the most important piece, right? So we are one of the, if not the top university campus for quantum R&D, right? Going all the way from Nobel through, translation. People should know that, right? We should be proud of that. We should be talking about it. If I bump into a peer in Netherlands, they should say, oh, CU Boulder, yeah, you guys are dominating in quantum. How did you do it, right? And then again, in sustainability, we want to be that world leader, right? And that's a space where ultimately we want everybody to be a world leader because that's how you transform the planet. But we want our reputation to correlate directly with our reality, right? We have over 40% of our incoming students this year have a high school grade point of 4.0 or higher, right? We should be known for having that elite student population because we do. right? We are a highly competitive institution, and so do I prioritize one audience over the other? I mean, I'd have to ask you for more nuance on what you mean by that, because I think, you know, there's so many important audiences for a large state university, right? So I want the people of Colorado to recognize that CU Boulder is excitedly and enthusiastically educating students from across the state, that we are working hard to better reflect the diversity of the state, that we see our role as impacting the economies across the state, right? Producing human resources for, you know, businesses of all sorts, industries of all sorts across the entire state. We want the legislature to understand that we are a resource of the state that is, you know, neutral on political perspective, and that we truly are committed to, you know, to free speech, to academic freedom, to being that forum for dialogue, to advance ideas from all quarters in a respectful and productive way. But we also want to be recognized by our peers nationally and internationally as being, you know, one of the most powerful research engines in the world. We want people to know that we produced more spin-off companies last year than any other university in a single year ever, with only one exception, right? That we are really, we don't just talk about innovation, we activate into innovation. Those are real things, real outcomes that are beneficial to our student, to our community, to our state, to our country. And those are the messages that all those audiences should hear.
So I'll give you a little bit of nuance on that.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Yeah, so at certain universities, you know, you have an identity within the general populace of being known for something, right? There has been, I think, over the last 25 years at this school, and I know it was prevalent when I was here, you know, and this is purely anecdotal. It's something that I think a sentiment a lot of students of mine would share, is that, you know, there's a battle that happens not just here, but at a bunch of other universities. This split between academia and athletics, for instance. Within the journalism school, there was a split between practical, pragmatic skills that could get you jobs versus academic research, and the importance of, you know, prioritizing graduate students, you know, over undergrads that would go out into the field. So I guess that's kind of where I come from a prioritization standpoint, right? Because if you were to ask somebody in the journalism school, what is the most important thing that this school should be doing, it would be a different answer from an identity perspective depending on who you talk to. Ditto athletics and academia, right? There's a train of thought out there that athletics is a marketing tool. It is a loss leader, you know, financially, and could, I mean, in some cases it can be cash positive, but, you know, for most people it's a loss leader because marketing allows you to bring enrollments up because you have the guy with the glasses and the hat that's in all the commercials and on national television all the time, versus folks that say, well, that shouldn't be the thing that brings people in here. The thing that should bring people in here is the research and is the grants and the things that we are able to do. So I guess to provide a little bit more nuance to follow up, that's what I mean from a prioritization standpoint, is, I guess, your predecessor was known as someone that, at least within the student community, that prioritized the academia first and wanted to turn Colorado into an academic institution, even if it meant coming to the detriment of other things. Where would you say you stand on prioritizing what the identity of the university should be? And do you think there is room to have a multifaceted identity, that one does not have to be sacrificed in favor of the other?
Right. So the short answer is we are an academic institution first and foremost, right? That's what we were created to do. Our mission is clearly defined, and I think we all know it and embrace it. Now, to get into more of the nuances of the bottom line up front to your last question is, of course we can do more than one thing. Yeah. I mean, yes, we're a large state university. We have a diverse spectrum of academic disciplines. We have a wide variety. We have 37,000+ students. They're not all here for the exact same thing. They're all here for one similar thing. They're here to advance themselves personally and professionally. They're here to, the way I describe it, what we want to offer them is an unfair competitive advantage when they graduate compared to students from anywhere else, right? Because you don't want a fair fight in that context. You want to have the advantage, right? So we are here to give them unique life-changing experiences that are both academic and co-curricular and social. Now, the question of athletics versus academics is a wrong question. We have about 260 student athletes, right? They are students. right? Very few of them will be professional athletes. They know that, right? You were a potential D1 athlete. You knew that. You weren't going to be a professional skier, right? You still you got skis on your socks, but that's not what's paying your bills, right? So, athletics is at times can be, yes, a huge marketing tool because it's something that people see, right? And an element, what the academics in marketing will tell you is frequent visualization of a logo brings familiarity and right, plays a role. It's also true that when you watch a CU football game on TV and you see the Flatirons, right, there's some marketing in that visual too, right? This is, I talked to students during move-in, and a lot of them came because they want an outdoor life, right? And you're gonna get a great outdoor life if you come to Boulder. You're gonna get great academics, right? We have program after program after program that's ranked in the top 10 or 20 in the country academically. And they come for that, but they come for that and the rest of the lifestyle piece that comes with it. So, we can walk and chew gum and skip rope all at the same time, and we should, because we're a large premier institution. Now, to your question of what I think I heard your question of being sort of the theoretical versus the applied,
correct,
right?
Yes.
So, that could vary from department to department to program, right? Some will do both, right? So you could easily have, I'll choose a random example, and I'm not saying this is our college, but like this is one of the questions in colleges of education around the country is, are you a research college of education or are you teacher training? And it doesn't have to be an or, right? And a large state university that has a research mission and a service to the state mission can do excellent undergraduate and graduate education. They're not mutually exclusive. Research experiences for undergraduates is one of the ways that you give an undergraduate student a broader co-curricular experience that isn't necessarily the theoretical versus the practical, but that research experience brings classroom to life, right? So again, we're a complex system, and these things actually all fit together. They're not in tension against each other. They're actually, in totality, the thing that makes a large state university such a fantastic opportunity for students, faculty, and staff.
Within the education system writ large, do you sense a feeling of pressure within universities? Because as state funding evolves, and money allocated towards universities changes, there is a greater desire or need to cash in on grant money, research partnerships, research dollars that can help augment some of the losses that are coming from something like declining enrollment or less state funding. Do you feel that that's just a general pressure on the system? Have you sensed that that pressure is here, if at all?
So in general, I would say research dollars don't offset the E&G budget, right? I mean, they are, when you get a research grant, there's a budget that says specifically what you're going to spend it on, right? And you can't just take that money and then say, okay, now I'm going to hire another faculty in this area, right? It's to do what you're funded to do, right? So there's really not and yes, there's an F&A return, indirect cost on research grants, but that most people would argue doesn't actually offset the entire cost, right? It's certainly not making you more fluid in terms of expenditures that you can put in other places, right? There is certainly significant financial pressure on state universities across the country. There's pressure in terms of how to maintain affordability, right? We really do want, I want students choosing where they go to school based on where can they best meet their personal and professional goals, right? Whether it's CU Boulder or somewhere else, not, well, I'd really love to go here, but I can't afford it, so I gotta go there, right? We don't want students to come here simply because this is the only place they could afford, right? We want them coming because they really match the culture and the offerings of who we are, right? And so, yes, there is, and there are places where there's more than less pressure on, are you producing graduates who are ready for these industries as opposed to, the full spectrum. We are a large state university. We are committed to, the full spectrum of academic offerings in STEM and humanities and arts. I will say, though, that one thing I've discovered is we have a tremendously positive culture of academic program review and assessment. So we are probably better than most, I would argue, in saying, okay, this program isn't really when we need it anymore, and sunsetting. We actually do that self-assessment because when you're under a budget, tight fiscal times, right? If you want to create something new that you need to create, you need to transfer funds from somewhere else that maybe isn't as in high demand. So we have that culture, and I think that's actually one of the things that's kept us so strong.
Now, those two things, right? The evolving financial climate for universities, but also, this desire to be something for everyone from a diversity perspective can kind of be a bit of a catch-22 in certain respects. When you consider,
I'm not sure what you mean by something for everyone.
Well, something for everyone in terms of saying I can't afford this place, so I have to go somewhere else is what I mean. Right, yeah. Because when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, diversity, I think we sometimes pigeonhole that into a concept of it being race-based, when the reality is diversity is very multifaceted, but also includes economic diversity as well. And so I guess that's what I mean by a catch-22, because the regents are considering tuition hikes, right? And having to use those to offset what is happening with the budgets themselves. But you're also trying to put, especially at this university, an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and improving that within the school. And those two things can bump, So how do you offset those changes in tuition, those changing financial realities that are occurring at the university, while also understanding too, diversity is not something that starts and stops at, a race or gender-based question. It is also a finance-based question too.
That's right. Oh yeah, absolutely. So when we think about diversity, we think about an inclusion and equity. We talk about it in terms of representing the diversity of Colorado, right? Which includes high SES and low SES students of all different racial demographics. And so that is the goal. And so yes, it is a challenge, right? Because we want to be able to serve the students that want to be here, right? And we are the flagship campus of I would say the flagship university of the state of Colorado. To me, flagship means that we should be leading, right? That's the whole construct of a flagship is that's the ship that has the flag high up so the rest of the fleet follows, right? It doesn't mean we're more important than the rest of the fleet, but we are the leading ship of the fleet. And so, balancing out the different financial pressures of in-state and in-state tuition, out-of-state tuition, international students. We look to be more efficient in everything we do. So one of the conversations I've started with the leadership team as we go into goal setting is how do we think about year over year increasing the percentage of our budget that goes to academics and student-facing units, right? To me, that's the way to articulate being more operationally efficient, right? Where are we spending our money? And so it's a year over year challenge and struggle. We are above there's a requirement for the percentage of our students that are in state. We're well above it. We're going to continue to be above it. We're going to continue, if not expanding our outreach and connections to populations around the state because we want to serve them better than we have in some cases in the past. But we do have to think about how we balance that with the financial challenges that come with it.
So I'll give you kind of a layman's anecdote that you can either confirm, refute, and or explain here, right? There was a joke when I was a student here, UC Boulder, the University of California, Boulder, because we had so many out-of-state kids, and I say this as an out-of-state kid. I came from New York, I came on out-of-state tuition, but the belief among some of the in-state kids was the university has to make money one way or another, and so there is a prioritization that can occur with out-of-state students because out-of-state students are paying a higher portion of the tuition than the in-state kids, and that comes to the detriment of the in-state kids. Right. So that's a contention that's very popular just among people out in the ether.
Why is it at the detriment of the in-state kids? Because our in-state acceptance rate's pretty high.
Well, but that's the belief, and that's why I wanted to give you the floor to kind of to explain that further to people, because there's going to be people that are not as into the weeds of education as you. So does that occur? I mean, does a school, seeing the financial realities of the time, look at the money that could be brought from an in-state student and say, well, if it's between that and the in-state kid, this could maybe help our budget a little more. So if it's a competition among equals in terms of of what they bring as an academic qualifier, take the one that's going to give you more money.
Right. So first I'll say that the high school that produced the most out-of-state students coming into CU this fall is not in California.
Texas?
Nope. One more shot.
My home state of New York.
Nope.
Where at?
Illinois.
Ah, you're Chicago folks.
Well, not only that, but it's actually my high school's rival high school, which is why it's stuck in my head.
Ah, interesting.
Yes. So I take exception first to the question, the comment of it being to the detriment of the Colorado student. One of the benefits of coming into a large state university is meeting a diverse students of diverse backgrounds, right? So coming from New York, you brought an experience to Coloradans that they wouldn't have had if every student here was from Colorado, right? Bringing in students from Texas and California and Illinois. We have students this year from every state in the country. Only one from South Dakota, but there is one. So we have 50 states and 40-something countries represented in the first year class. That is value added to each of those students because that's a life experience that they won't get. They will understand how different people across this country think in a different way than if we didn't have that. We have I think this year, if I remember right, and I just started, I believe our percentage of in-state yield is higher than previous years, and out-of-state went down a little bit. Okay. So does that affect our budget? Yes, but our mission is Colorado. We are the University of Colorado, not California. Yeah. I'm glad for that. California is a great place. It's not Colorado, right? You came west and you stopped. You didn't keep going, right?
Exactly.
Right. So, yes, we do have to balance our budget for sure. But I think the out-of-state and international students bring more than just money.
There is and has historically been a reputation of Boulder that precedes it from a race perspective. It has been on ESPN documentaries where that has been highlighted. You talk to folks within Black communities here in Colorado, within communities of color in Colorado. There is a discussion about Boulder and its reputation within there, and also the racial makeup of this school historically. How do you adjust that, combat that, and try to change that? Not only in the short, but in the long term, because doing something like that is not a cure-all fix that occurs in 1 year. Deion Sanders being hired does not fix the race problem at the University of Colorado. And so how do you look at it where you have, probably 5, 10, 15, 20-year plans for how to adjust this, but how do you create actionable things that you can show people along the way so they don't think nothing is happening until they wake up 20 years from now and you go, boom, look, it's all done, we did it.
Great question. So there's the listening tour piece, which is talking to people. But there's another piece that's critical that I think coming in from the outside is helpful. And that's how are we actually assessing what we do, right? So I can get lots of anecdotes, right? And I can look at the data, but neither of those answer the fundamental question, why? Why is that? Why are the numbers what they are, right? When Boulder is externally perceived as being, a place that you would expect to have great diversity, right? So why? So one of the things we're going to start doing is surveying prospective students and their families after they visit campus and find out what was your experience, right? Because if we don't ask, we don't know, right? And so asking the question, why did you come? Why did you stay? Why did you leave? Right? What did you think? What was your experience when you were here? And really appreciating and understanding what people's experiences are lets you then self-assess and say, wow, we're doing this, and it's giving that population a perception that we don't want to be giving, right? Again, so how do we make our reality and the perception align? So we have to understand what our reality is, and we have to understand how we're being perceived, right? So when Deion Sanders comes in and, starts to bring a culture of being outspoken, right? I wouldn't say he brings a culture of being bold because we are, be bolder. I will tell you, be bolder.
It's not in the name.
Right. It's not just our tagline. It is what we're going to live, right? Being bolder means something different to every person, right? So I've had people say to me, well, you shouldn't have be bolder as your mindset because that's telling people that everyone needs to be the same. And to me, being bolder is just the opposite of that, right? Being bolder means sort of you be you and she'll be her, and we'll celebrate each other, right? And celebrating each other means that when there's students of color who are coming on campus, rather than saying, they're so minoritized that they don't belong, no, let's celebrate the fact that they're bringing something to our campus that's fundamentally different than what other people bring. Yeah. So there's that understanding, why are the numbers what they are? Going into the communities of color and Latino and Latina communities and indigenous student communities and rural communities on the western slope and eastern farmland, and understanding what's your perception of Boulder, and why is that, is there a reality to it, or are we just not telling our story well? So higher ed can get into a mindset of, I won't say ivory tower is probably not quite the right phrase for Boulder, but higher ed can get into its own bubble, right? And start assuming that, well, of course everyone's going to be here, right? Not realizing that we're sending messages that are inconsistent. So it really, to me, starts with understanding why we are where we are. What are the aspects of our culture that are contrary to itself, right? Because I think if you ask most of the people on campus and in the Boulder community, do you support diversity and equity and inclusion? It's me, of course, right? But then where is it?
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's really understanding that transition from supportiveness to actualization.
Well, and that's kind of, I think, a greater societal discussion to have, right? Is that there's, to be quite frank, there is a lot of, folks that look like us that can support DEI in theory, but then in practice, when they see it, a lot of those implicit biases come back out. And you realize about people really quick, there might not be a progressivism within yourself that you think you have. And it was so interesting. My wife and I went to the CU Nebraska football game last year, and for the first time since I had ever been on campus, I saw individuals with fraternity jackets that were, historically black fraternities that I didn't even know existed on campus, if they even existed at all.
Had you read the Divine Nine before then?
I did read about the Divine Nine, yeah.
You read about it, you didn't experience it?
I did not experience, no. And the interesting thing with that, though, is that it did kind of create a thought in my head of, I wonder how or what the degrees of unfortunate uncomfortability there are or may be within folks walking around Boulder seeing something so drastically different than what they're used to seeing. How do you, as in your role as the leader and steward of this university, handle that piece? Because the theory is easy. Putting out tweets is a real easy cosmetic thing that we can all do when the months come around. But the actual practice of engaging the implicit biases and changing them in ways that don't make people feel defensive or feel like they are being attacked for not knowing that their ignorance is showing or on display or coming up in how their decisions are being made, that requires a lot of skill and a lot of tact.
And time.
How do you plan on approaching it?
So one, I think, in those, so I would say two things, and these may sound opposing, but they're not.
Okay.
One is, I don't know if you ever lifted weights when you were skiing, right? What's the premise?
It doesn't show.
Sure it does. What is the premise of lifting weights? When you apply tension, you get growth. So it's important to recognize that it's okay to have a little bit of tension to stimulate growth. It's okay to have, so I like to say people need to be comfortable being a little bit uncomfortable, right? Because that's also what helps drive growth. And then there's it's experiential, right? If you've never had, the first time you have an experience, it's going to be the most uncomfortable time you have that experience. But you've got to have the first one to have the second one, right? So I have a child who's going to start driving on the road soon, right? That first time out is going to be really uncomfortable, right? But the second time will hopefully be better. And right, so the piece that goes with that discomfort is what I would describe as grace, right? We have to all understand that and give person the benefit of the doubt that if they say something the wrong way, right, that it may not be with the wrong intention, right? And so there has to be that everyone, I don't want to say both sides because it's not a both, it's all, because we are all in situations where we may have privilege and we're all in situations where we don't, right? Because we all need to be, we all have less identities than the identities that we don't have, right? So there needs to be an understanding that if I asked you a question about being a reporter and I said it in a way that you took as derogatory, You could either assume I was attacking the profession, or you could educate me, right, saying, well, we look at it this way, right? That's grace, right? So there needs to be that understanding that if someone is trying to grow, that's what they're trying to do, and learning is a process. So there's that piece, and then I think and the flip side of that, of course, is also politely and constructively calling things out when they happen. And then there's also an important piece of knowing our values as an institution, living them, truly living them, walking them, articulating them, willing to take a difficult position, even if it may have repercussion, because it's core to our value, right? And standing up in that way. And because from my experiences in living in a lot of different places and growing up in one of the most diverse K-12 environments of the time, people notice, right? So minoritized folks who have experienced things, they notice subtle differences in language and the way you talk about, not you personally, but the way someone talks about something, right? Subtle word choices that are subconscious give very different indications to people in terms of where that person is in their thinking. So it's a complicated challenge to change culture, and there's lots of social science on it, right? It's not something where we're operating in mystery, but one of the fundamental things that has come out of literature years ago was the number one way to change culture is to just talk about it, right? So if you want to have a more equitable society and culture, then you talk about the issues on a regular basis, not in a, we're going to have a 1 hour training today and then we're done, but just sort of in subtle day-to-day life. So a couple weeks ago was the 60th anniversary of when Mandela was arrested, right? And if you were to be arrested today and be in jail as long as he was, you'd be coming out somewhere in the 2050s, right? Think about that, right? We just had the Olympics, right? How much conversation was there? And there was some about the success of the U.S. Olympic team being an example of the power of a diverse team, right? I mean, you can look at the images and see, the strength of our team. Now, of course, one could also turn around and say, well, China came in second, right? So, there is always that other piece of the conversation that can't be dismissed, right? If I were to say that and you were to say, oh, but that's different, well, then that's dismissing the fact that these topics are complicated.
Yeah.
And we need to recognize that.
Well, and I think to that point, the difficulty and complication that can also arise too is that if the onus is on one to always explain how the other was wrong, that person can not only feel exhausted with having to always explain, but the other person can also feel exhausted for having to be talked down to or talked at. Sure. And so there is kind of like that interesting process that has to occur organically of a person has to be proactive enough to hear it and then go, okay, now I got to go educate myself on the ways that I can do that better and not have to rely on this person to always sort of be my guide on what is correct and what is not and what is implicit and what is not. To change gears a little bit into, the other component of the financial diversity of this university, one of the big issues, and it was starting to butt up around my time, and it's I think probably gotten worse, especially post-COVID, the way real estate prices kind of are, is the accessibility of housing, especially off-campus housing here. To the point of trying to make it a more accessible place for people, do you worry that the city of Boulder, not the city itself within its governmental practices, but the city as an entity is, in one way or another, pricing out its students and also pricing out families on top of that too, because it's not, not a lot of kids can afford $1,500 a month. Mom and dad are having to kind of help foot some of this bill if they're getting off campus after their freshman year. How closely are you guys monitoring that, and how much of an interest do you take personally in that, knowing that past freshman year, that could also become a barrier of entry to students of different backgrounds that are not upper middle class or higher?
So you phrased the question, do I worry about that? I don't worry about it. I know it's a fact, right? I don't think is this a challenge? I think I would phrase it is a challenge. We know that. And so we're actually, like I said, I'm 52 days, right? So I've got a great leadership team, and I said to them, these are the 3 things that we need to look into right now, the 3 big things, right? Why do we have a retention year 1 to year 2, year 2 to year 3, year 3 to year 4 that we have? Why are we not keeping and retaining more of our students by demographic group, whether it's SES, race, gender, where they're from, right? I want a full understanding of, again, back to the why, right? Why don't we have 100% of our students graduate in 4 years, right? And I want to understand it by group, and I want to understand it by cause. I have lots of anecdotes, right? And all the anecdotes are true, but I want to understand the challenge, right? Number 2 is what are our options for creating more low-cost, affordable housing for faculty and staff, right? We have a couple projects that are already underway that are well documented. What are the options can we accelerate those? Are there other options that we have, right? Not saying we're going to we're going to engage in the community before we do anything, but as someone new, I want to understand what are the options, what would it take to do these different situations? And number 3 is what would we need to do to increase opportunities for students to live on campus, not to grow the first-year population, but to increase the number of second, third, fourth-year students that continue to live on campus. Because that first question might be, to your point, well, we're losing a lot of students because they can't afford housing third, fourth year, right? If that's one of the answers, I want to know what I'm going to do about it, right? And, so I mean, you go back 30-something years when housing prices in Boston skyrocketed faster than anywhere in the country, right? Went from past San Francisco as the most expensive city in the country back in around late 80s. Undergraduate students at MIT lived on campus 4 years. That was it. I mean, yes, some would go into sororities and frats, some would go into apartments, but for the most part, if they wanted to live in the same housing unit for 4 years, that's what they did, right? I don't think we need to do that. Right, but that's the extremum. It's not like that's unheard of in expensive housing markets. So, I don't see us I don't think our students would want to have the capacity to have 4 years on campus. But what are the opportunities for us? Like, I need to know what the options are before we can then figure out what we want to do, right? So I don't want the community here, oh my God, they're about to build all these dorms. No, I'm just trying to understand the situation to your question, right? Does it worry me? No, I know it's a problem. Now I need to understand what are my options.
So I will end on a question that kind of has been a through line throughout this interview, whether it's folded into academia, identity, race, athletics, because obviously the athletics guy has got to ask you something about athletics at the end. What do you think the role of it is within a university, and how much effort and energy would you as a chancellor, or will you as a chancellor, put into cultivating a strong athletic tradition and culture here at the university, especially given the comments of your boss, President Solomon at the top of the system, saying, I want CU athletics to be a standard bearer and CU football to be a standard bearer, not just for the university system, but nationally as well, and put out a winning product and have people be interested in it and be on some level engaged in the arms race that currently exists within the sport. Where do you lie as a chancellor on that?
So first I would say, in many ways we are a national standard bearer, because there's more to a successful athletics program than just wins on the field. And this year our student athletes had a higher grade point than the university across the board. That is a national standard. That is exceptional. And we need to recognize that athletics isn't only about on-field, right? It's about the experience of our students. It's about not just the student athletes, but what it brings to all of our students, right, in terms of the overall culture of the university. People can question whether athletics has an oversized role in higher ed or not. The reality is it is a big piece of large state universities across the country. It just fundamentally is, and it's going to continue to be. We absolutely want to have more and more success on the field, on the slopes, right? I mean, we're national champions again in skiing. If you go over to the Champions Center and you see where the cross country and track have their trophies, it's pretty impressive, right? And we are investing in football. Football in particular is in a transitional period. I don't want to say it's a transitional point, it's a transitional period. It's gone through major transitions, and there's probably more to come, right? There's still things working their way through the courts, right? And then how we respond to, how we higher ed respond to what comes out of the courts. There's questions of student versus employee, right? I mean, there's all these uncertainties, and we will be part of those conversations, and we will be strategic and tactical. We have the benefit right now of having the athletic director of the year, who is, truly one of the, few people in the country that understands this deeply. He is a tremendous resource to the university, to the campus, and to me. So I celebrate. Rick George doesn't get enough credit for just how good he is, I think. We'll see how things unfold on the field this year in football. We're all excited for the game coming up next week. But if you separate yourself from the noise, I don't mean noise too pejoratively, but a little bit pejoratively, that some of your colleagues in sports media may generate, and actually listen to what Coach Sanders says about his commitment to his students, his athletes, and their careers, it's genuine, right? So when I met with him privately, he talks about, he's got this player, he's not going to go in the NFL, he wants to go into this career path, and how he's helping him find that path, right? He really is truly dedicated to his athletes, and his student athletes, becoming the type of citizens we want in this country. Successful in life, successful in profession, and successful in everything they do. And I think if you actually hear the words he says on those topics, you'll realize that he is not just innovative in his approach to recruiting, right? He is genuine in his approach to developing his students. And I think that's true of all of our coaches. I don't mean to, I focus on Prime because y'all do.
Yeah.
But the fact is,
let's be honest too. Football is the financial driver for a lot of these athletics.
Yes.
And for better or worse, we have to call it what the reality is.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they're only a third of our athletes. Mm-hmm. And that academic success is across the board. We have great people from the academic side of the institution with their offices in the Champions Center, helping the students really balance that, the time pressure for a student athlete to be competitive in D1, to want to aspire to Olympics or pros, and have a fantastic grade point average. It's hard work, right? And I think we don't necessarily, I think sometimes in the noise of who's going to be number one, we forget about the life-changing effect of being a D1 athlete is on those students, and the impact of the presence of high-quality athletics that's done right has across the whole institution. So yes, there's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be naysayers on all sorts of different things at higher ed, because we, by definition, attract people who are here to talk through how do we as a society do something better, right? Whether it's English lit, Russian lit, music, art, engineering, physics, right? The focus of the research and creative enterprise that faculty come for is to say, this is where we are in this discipline, how do we do it better? And they take that same mindset to everything across the university. So we're always going to have that conversational tension of, should we be doing this or should we be doing it differently? In everything we do. If we didn't have that, I'd be worried about our institution, right? So, it's that, it applies into the DEI space, it applies really across the board of that constructive intellectual tension of growth drives us to be the engine that helps advance all of Colorado and the nation.
Well, the way you wrap that up, you're ready for convocation, sir. I see you going. Chancellor, thank you so much.
Don't stop me yet. So I want to go back to one thing, because there was an anecdote you pivoted right before I got to share it. So I was talking to one of our more advanced students of color. Mm-hmm. And just one of those sort of, this kind of open conversation, right? It wasn't, I want to talk to you about this. It was just literally in a parking lot, right? What's your experience been? Came up that the student had lived in many states. And I asked him, where was your favorite place to live? And he said, oh, here. So I said, why? And he said something that really took me by surprise, which was great. Yeah. He said, it's the first time in my life I felt safe. Interesting. So when you ask about the Boulder culture, mm-hmm. right, that's important. right? Because, we talk about, success. Well, to have success, you have to have belonging, right? So we talk a lot about belonging now. If you think about the first fundamental ingredient to belonging is safe, right? When you think about where do you feel the most belonging, it's at home, right? When you feel threatened, what do? You retreat to where you feel safe and belonging. So the fact that this student said to me, yeah, this is the first time I've really felt safe, tells me that we can do this.